Morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of the German Marshall Fund's Brussels Forum. Over the last 3 days, we've covered many components of the world of disorder, but I think to all of us the most concerning is the threat of terrorism. And we're going to dig into that question from many dimensions this morning, starting with our first panel, which will look at what we're doing to fight terrorism abroad in 2 parts. First, with a perspective from the West, from the United States and Europe, and how we're taking the fight to terrorists, especially in the Middle East. But then the second part of the panel will be a discussion from what it looks like on the ground in Iraq. We will end our discussion of terrorism with thinking about the very difficult trade-offs that all of us are facing when it comes to our values and holding up our liberties, but also the very difficult decisions we have to make when it comes to our security. This is something that's very much on our minds in the last 48 hours, starting with Friday night's dramatic events here in Brussels, with yesterday's terrible suicide bombing in Istanbul that killed 2 Americans. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to one of the best journalists we've had who's covered these wars from CBS, my friend Cami McCormick, but we'll start with a short video introduction. Thank you very much.
The threat of domestic terror on both sides of the Atlantic is palpable. The ongoing evolution of the tactics, scope, and organization of terrorist groups requires equally dynamic policy responses that include both conventional and unconventional options. Transnational financing, trafficking, and criminal activities, state sponsorship of terrorist organizations, threats from failed and failing states, and the role of climate change must all be addressed. The United States has been at the forefront of military efforts to degrade and ultimately destroy terrorist activities abroad. On the European side, France has been a key actor, as evidenced by French operations in Mali and throughout the Middle East and North Africa. More broadly speaking, transatlantic partners have consolidated efforts through sanctions, maritime patrols and military support, and applying diplomatic pressure on regional powers. Are their current toolkits and policies sufficient to address terrorist threats? How effective are military responses and what are their limitations? Is there an over-reliance on military options? How can transatlantic partners better influence regional powers to step up in the fight against extremist groups?
Hello. This is quite a crowd for a Sunday morning. Thank you all for coming out. This is going to be really exciting. We were just discussing all the issues before we came in here, and you could hardly get a word in edgewise. There's so much going on and so many complexities in the world. So we'll start with a couple of issues that have just happened recently. I'll introduce you to the panel first. On your left here, we have the Honorable Youssef Amrani, who is head of mission for the Royal Cabinet of Morocco. Next to him, we have General Gratien Maire, who is the Vice Chief of Defense of France. The Honorable Didier Reynders, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, and U.S. Senator Jeff Sessions. So thank you very much for being here. We want to remind you that you can use your app, your Brussels Forum app, to submit questions if you like. If you're on social media at home, you can use Twitter, #BrusselsForum, and we will see some of the questions pop up on these video screens. So that will be one way of getting questions in. We also encourage you to ask questions, keep them as short as possible. There are a lot of people here and a lot of issues. So thanks again for being here. Before we get started on the issue of the day, we want to talk to the foreign minister about what happened here in Brussels on Friday with the arrest of Salah Abdeslam. First of all, if you could update us on what's happening in his case. I know he's being questioned by authorities, what you hope to learn from him. And we've heard from French authorities that this investigation could grow. The network may actually be bigger than was first thought. Also, if you could address critics who wonder why it took so long to find him here in Brussels.
First of all, I want to say that Bruges is not only a movie, it's also a city with a prison, an easy jail. So it's very important because we are very proud of the actions of the special force in Belgium because it was possible to take such a guy alive. And it's very important for the families of all the victims of the terrorist attacks in Paris because we will go to a real jurisdiction and it will be possible in the near future to organize a trial with such a guy alive. And that is very important. Of course, it was very long to find a way to organize the arrestation. Due to what? It's very difficult to know where he want to go. Outside Belgium, to Syria, we receive many informations, and many people have seen Salah Abdeslam in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in many other places, true or not. But now, after many investigations, first of all from the intelligence services, it was possible to find him in two phases. First, investigations some days ago in a specific place in Brussels to find some weapons. And we have found a lot of weapons, but without an indication of the presence of Salah Abdeslam there. And due to a lot of investigation in such a place, it was possible to have indications about his presence in Brussels. And due to that, some days later, and on Friday, it was possible to find him in a new operation. So now we start the inquiries, and there are many possibilities, not only for the Belgian authorities, but also in joint teams with France to start the discussions with such a guy, but of course with a lawyer. And we have seen that from the beginning it will be very difficult, because the first reaction of his lawyer was to say, we don't want to go to France. So you know that there is maybe a specific situation in Europe, because we have a so-called European mandate. So at least in 3 months, we need to send him to France. So we will have a procedure, but we start the investigations now, and we will receive a lot of comments. The first comments coming from Salah Abdeslam was yesterday that he wanted to go to the Stade de France in Paris, and it was to be a suicide bombing, but he stopped. We don't know why, but he stopped. And the next informations are that he was ready to restart something from Brussels. And it's maybe the reality, because I said we have found a lot of weapons, heavy weapons, in the first investigations, and we have seen a new network of people around him in Brussels. So it was so difficult. I don't want to mention other kind of research for many other peoples, sometimes very famous. Ben Laden, it was very long before to have a real indication about the presence of Ben Laden in Pakistan.
Do you think he had many accomplices in keeping him in hiding?
Of course, of course. There are many networks, not only with maybe members of his family and people with some the same ideology that himself, but there are so many links between the so-called terrorists and the criminals. They are using the same tools, they are using the same cars, the same apartments, the same locations. And there are many links between some criminals, not only in Brussels. We have seen that in Paris. After the terrorist attacks, it was possible to find some apartments with the same kind of relations between criminal guys and terrorists. And so now it's the next step to see if it's possible to find other people from the same network after the terrorist attack in Paris, but maybe also to try to find others. And it's the reason why you have seen maybe that in Belgium we have different level of threat, and we have explained to the population that we are still in the same level of threat now than before the arrestation.
And what about borders?
But because we are knowing that there are many other people in the streets, maybe in Brussels or in other cities, with the same ideology. And after the terrorist attacks in Paris, I have said to one TV channel in the US that we were searching around 10 people with heavy weapons. We have found more than that since November. And not only in Belgium, but also in France. And we are sure that for the moment we have found more than 30 people involved in the terrorist attacks in Paris. But we are sure that there are others. So it's very important to go further with the same kind of approach. And again, we are very proud of such an action from the special forces. It's very visible on television. But the most important thing is to exchange more and more information among the intelligence services. And then, when it's possible to organize that, to send those informations to the police people in the streets. Because if you want to organize some control, some verification of identities, you need to have the information. So the most important thing, I'm asking that in the NATO, but I'm asking that also in the European Union since some years. We need to exchange information. Just to give an example, if you have a foreign fighter leaving his country to go to Syria or Iraq, he will come back, but not necessarily in his own city or his own country. The first terrorist attack committed by a foreign fighter was in Brussels, 24 May in 2014, the Jewish Museum, 4 dead people. It was a French guy leaving France to Syria and coming back for 3 weeks in Brussels. So if we don't exchange information about such a situation from one country to another one, it's very difficult to manage. And I must confess that it's improving. We have seen more and more capacity to exchange information with many partners in Europe, with the US, and inside the NATO, just to give a last example, with Turkey. In Turkey, it's a very important partner to us to find a way to stop some foreign fighters trying to go to Syria or to Iraq, but also to receive information about those guys coming back. It's a transit country, and we have organized since some years trilateral meetings with Turkey. So I'm sharing information with my colleagues of Foreign Affairs, Justice, and Home Affairs in Turkey. And so we are together all the time, and the services are together to try to exchange information. But again, it was very difficult to organize such an arrestation of such a guy alive, but it was very important to do that, and I'm very proud that this was possible. But to go further, again, we need to exchange more and more information among the different services.
And I'm sure that will come up again in our discussions because there are so many countries working on the problem of countering terror abroad, from North Africa to the Middle East to Europe. We've got a real global challenge now of terrorism that keeps spreading. We're conducting airstrikes, we're conducting drone strikes, we're sending in special forces to various places. It sometimes seems as if this chase will never end. And we're throwing a whole lot of money at this problem. So I'm wondering to get your thoughts, your broad views on what's happening now strategically, and we'll dive into more specific detail after your initial comments. But I know it's a very complex situation, but are we succeeding in what we're doing right now? And let's start with you on the left, Mr. Amrani.
Well, thank you very much for choosing this very important topic today. I think we have to be very frank tackling this issue. Today we are all targeted. Countries in the southern Mediterranean, the European countries, and beyond, the transatlantic in America and elsewhere. I completely share the views expressed by Didier, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Belgium, about the necessity of what I call the security approach. Exchange of intelligence, military intervention in conflict. It is important important tool to face the terrorist activities and to combat Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and others. But it's not sufficient. We need a comprehensive approach. Of course, I'm speaking from a southern perspective, from Morocco, who's chairing the Committee on Foreign Fighters with our partners from Europe. We are cooperating very closely with Belgium as far as dismantling cells. And we have a great experience in this issue and will continue. But we feel that today we need to have a comprehensive approach towards terror. How? I think we need 4 fundamentals and parameters. First, the political development in our region, because the Arab Spring has opened new prospects. But in fact, what happens today in our region is more insecurity, more fragmentation, and because of lack of political development. When I say political development is implementation of democracy, good governance, respect of universal values, because at the end of the day, we share the same values. The second fundamental and parameter is the economic. Because at the end of the day, what imports is how much job do you create to face the expectation of the young generation. It's essential to promote growth, to create jobs, and this, we know the tools. Openness, free trade agreements, but also we have to do our own homework internally. And when I say internally, it means at the level of the countries of the region. We should build up coherent regional integration schemes. The Maghreb, for example, and Didier know, Maghreb is for Morocco is a priority. We could, building up the Maghreb, a regional coherent gathering, face the terrorist threat. Try to solve the Libyan conflict, where we were very much engaged as Moroccans in the Sahara talk. I will talk about Libya later on. To create jobs, to connect networks, transport, energy. This is the way. The third one is cooperation at the field of intelligence, dismantling sales. This cooperation should be frank, should be on a daily basis. And the fourth parameter is the deconstruction of the narrative, of the extremist narrative. And we can help in this. Because we are all targeted. The countries of the Maghreb and the Sahel and last year we were talking here and we were warning our colleagues, watch what is happening in Mali. Thanks to the French intervention, at that time we were in the Security Council and we helped for the resolution, we were able to face and to chase the extremists, but we not solve the problem. And last year we warned here that watch Boko Haram, watch Niger. Today we have even attacks of extremist movement in Côte d'Ivoire, in Burkina Faso. And the Sahel must be a priority for us. So I said the deconstruction, how? Through a new narrative. Because today, these bad guys, they control internet. They have access to financial means. They tackle the young generation and other generations too. So we need to have the tools. In Morocco, we have been embarked in this approach, and we'd like to share it with you. We are not even talking with our partners in Europe and Africa to train imams, men and women. But train imams is only on the fundamentals of this tolerant Islam, this open Islam. Because today, Islam is being hijacked by a minority who promote culture of hate and exclusion. And that's why we need, like in Morocco, the Rabitat Ulamat, to have a new discourse, that is consistent with our shared values of human rights and democracy. And this fourth priority, I think, today is important. And we are doing this also with France. And we are training French imams, because of course, there is this kind of specificity, but today religion is essential. And then from that, one important aspect is the reform of education in our countries. That takes into consideration our specificities, yes, but also gender equality, human rights, openness to the other religions, to other cultures. And this is thanks to the leadership of King of Morocco today. We are working on this four-track dimension strategy to combat terrorism. The political development, deepening democracy, economic job creation, cooperation and security and intelligence, and for the deconstruction of the jihadist narrative, but proposing an alternative narrative which is consistent and in conformity with our shared values.
Thank you, General.
Yeah, first of all, let me express my most sincere congratulations for the actions taken by Belgian forces on the subject we firstly addressed. I think it was a long term, and I will come back on this question of short term and long term. But it's a long term effort. This was successful, as it was mentioned. The fact that was this guy, Salah Abdeslam, was taken alive is something that, for the family of the victims, it's a very important. So thanks so much for what you have done, sir. Just a few words, perhaps, to start with. And coming back to the threat itself, being a military, we try to understand our adversaries first to see what we should do. And I think the terrorist threat today, and especially the one led by the so-called ISIS, ISIL or Daesh organization, has some very specific characteristics compared to others, perhaps, and because we have seen terrorism in our history for longer. The first one, as they claim a territorial, and they do have now, a territorial bedrock. And this is something very important in the way we should address this threat. They have a territory so far in the Levant as big as some of most European countries, about 10 million people. They have economic resources. They have gained some treasure and chest during the first actions in Iraq, in Mosul. We all know that. They have really an unprecedented level of financial and military resources and means available to them. So I think this is one first point. The second point, they do have, and it has been said, a totalitarian ideology that they are able to disseminate widely around the world thanks to the technology now. So, and they really enjoy a high power of attraction within our own societies. So this is the second one, a totalitarian ideology widely disseminated. Three, they have a strategy. They have a strategy. And for us, military, it's very important. A strategy with a direct approach within their area, Levant, today, perhaps tomorrow, Libya. They have a strategy. And they have also an indirect approach aimed at the periphery, trying to target our societies, our countries, the soft bell, if you want, in our countries. And this whole theory was written, I'm sure you all know that, in that book published in 2004 by Abu Bakr Najri, named Management of Savagery. And this is, if you read that book, you have the strategy of Daesh today. So understanding that, what should we do? And from a military perspective, and certainly I would totally share what has been said earlier. First of all, military action, and we may come back on this later on. It's trying to stall a momentum. It's trying to contain. It will not, we will not be able to destroy Daesh with military actions only, but it has to be done to stop, to contain. Then I think the second axis is trying to dry up financial resources. And we have to do that. We could do that for military actions. We do that as we are speaking today, but also with some international cooperation. So I think it's important, drying up financial sources. Opposing Daesh propaganda. Obviously, it's one of the major axes I see in terms of doing things against Daesh. We have to hit the vehicle itself. I mean, through internet, through the social medias. We have also to hit the content, and this is the counter-propaganda I fully support. We have also to stall the flow of foreign fighters. And again, it comes back to international cooperation. And finally, to be brief, trying to fight radical trends in our own societies. So this is the whole thing. I mean, that's where you were talking about comprehensive approach. We've been talking about comprehensive approach for years. I think it's another step in comprehensive approach. And it requires effort in all axes, in all domains, not only military. And on the heart of this is the ability to not only to share intelligence, but how to, and I fully join what you, how we do use this intelligence. We are in the area of big data. We have big data. We have many intelligences. How do we manage to take out of this big sum of intelligence the one that will be useful, the one we need to know, and the one we need to give to the people on the field, on the street, to make sure that we will take the right action. So those are big challenges. I'm not bringing here solutions, obviously, but just, perhaps open doors for further actions against terrorism.
Thank you. Minister?
I don't want to add something about the military action, because what I said is needed to contain the progress of Daesh or IS in the region, and also other groups in the Sahel or in other places. But we have some success now, and we have seen that in Syria and Iraq in the last months. But when we have success, they are going to Libya, They are committing maybe more and more terrorist attacks in the world. We have seen that in Europe, maybe in Turkey, in Istanbul yesterday, in the Sinai again. So I'm sure that we need to take part in the military action, but it's not enough. The second element, because I have listened about the comprehensive approach, is to give humanitarian help. Because if you don't use a lot of money to go to the displaced people in Syria, if it's possible, or in Iraq, but more than that, to go to the refugees in Lebanon, in Jordan, because those countries are under pressure, and now we've seen that we try to discuss between the European Union and Turkey to have a lot of people in Turkey, you need to face another challenge. So many refugees coming to Europe, and in the last months it was a very difficult issue in Europe. And I want to say that it's a global issue. So I will be very pleased to have a discussion at the UN level to organize not only a repartition of refugees in Europe, but in the world. And I've seen some efforts made by the US, by Canada, by others, to try to receive also a lot of people. But it's needed to take part in such a process. It's very needed to provide humanitarian help. But the most important thing is to try to have a solution for the root causes. And the first one, it's a political solution. And for the first time, since maybe many years, it's possible to have all the influent countries around the table. I mean, not only US and Russia, it's needed, European Union, but in the region, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And due to a real diplomatic success, I mean the nuclear agreement with Iran, it's now possible to maybe have a chance, the opportunity, to put all together around the table. And due to that, it's possible for Saudi Arabia to push pressure on the opposition in Syria to go to the negotiations. Maybe from Russia and from Iran, it's possible to push pressure on the regime of Bashar al-Assad to come to the table. And what's the goal? To have a new transition in Syria, to have an inclusive government in Iraq, with Shias and Sunnis and maybe also some minorities, to have the same evolution in Yemen maybe, to try to keep the situation as it is in Lebanon, with a repartition of influence. But without that, it's impossible to solve the situation on the ground. So we need to push pressure to have more and more capacity to go to a political solution. And I agree, we need a comprehensive approach. And just to add 2 words, of course, on the long term, we will discuss with Morocco, with others, to train the imams. I share the view that we need to have in Belgium, but in Europe, imams coming from the local communities and not coming from abroad with other visions of Islam than the vision of the local communities. But on the short term, we need to be sure that it's possible to send a counter-narrative in collaboration with the Muslim countries, because it's very important in the coalition, we are more than 60, it's important that it's not a message coming from the Western countries like the US or Europe, but it's very important to send a message with a real collaboration of all the Muslim countries. And more than that, it's very important to have on board all the people having an influence on the young generation in the Muslim community. To be honest, it's possible to me to send a message to young people in Brussels, but they don't have my picture in their bedroom. They
want to add,
except maybe 2 or 3, I don't know.
Are you sure? Yeah.
But I'm sure that they have some pictures of rappers, sport guys or women, or some very influent people coming from the Muslim community. And we need to make some progress to take all those people on board, because if it's possible to send a message to the young generation coming from people from the same community, it will be more influent than coming from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, of the intelligence services and others. And for the moment, we try to work on that, but it's not easy. And I fully understand that there is a fear. Of course, it's not easy to speak about terrorism, to speak about fanatism, because there are some risks. But that is very important also on the short term. Of course, on the long term, it's more a problem for the education and integration, in fact. Not only to train the imams, but to train all the young people to have a job maybe later and to take part in the society. But that is very important to try to attract a lot of Muslim countries in the counter-narrative, but also to attract a lot of people coming from the Muslim communities in our countries to send a message.
I want to add only one
Very
word
quickly,
because
please.
very quickly, I was very brief. I think we need also, Minister, to reconstruct the international order. And as a partner to Europe, I want to take this opportunity to request you to have a more ambitious policy towards the Mediterranean and toward the South. As far as one of the key actors in the European Union, today we feel, from the Southern perspective, there's a lack of ambitions of Europe. And I hope that the new communication of Mrs. Mogherini on June on the policy of security and defense will take this into consideration. Because we had ambition to work with you, and it is on your interest, because we are all targeted, to build up a policy that buys stability in our region. Also, I see some colleagues from NATO. NATO also has a new strategic concept. And I think also you should seek to find the necessary coherence in the international arrangement for peace and stability in the region. And I think time has come, you know. We could have avoided this refugee crisis if 3 years ago we were able, at the level of the Security Council, to find an outcome to the Syrian crisis. We were divided. At the time, Morocco was in the Security Council. I presented a resolution on Security Council on Syria. It was vetoed. But 3 years ago, there was no ISIS in Syria. There was only Jabhat al-Nusra, who played allegiance to Al-Qaeda, but ISIS was not. And we were divided, and we were not able to act. And this is, I think, we should now look and seek for new arrangement at the level of the Security Council to move forward. It is, of course, a question of shared responsibility. We don't have to blame the others. We need to do our own homework, but we need to have you on board as our partners.
Okay, Senator.
Well, thank you. Thank you and Belgium and the French investigators who ran this criminal down and captured him. It is important that the long arm of the law be perceived as successful. And I think this is a blow to this inevitability or the positive message that the ISIL group wants to promote, that they're going to win and be victorious every time they lose, is a blow to that whole ideology. You talk about how to fix the problem in the long run. It's something we've been talking about in the Senate, talking to some of my Democratic colleagues. We believe that we can have a bipartisan agreement that'll transcend elections and that can go on for a long time. The witnesses that we've had before our committee say this violent spasm within a small part of the Islamic world is going to continue for a long time. It won't end with Al-Qaeda. It won't end with ISIL. So how do we think about it and approach it in a way that our allies would join in wholeheartedly, our friends in the Muslim world would join wholeheartedly. We bring in all aspects of power. It is important to deal with the fundamental issues. I recall a television program in the United States firing line. They sat in chairs like this. Norman Cousin was the editor of the Saturday Review, and the conservative William Buckley was asking questions, and Cousins waxed eloquently about peace and how nuclear war should be eliminated and we need to work with the Russians. And Buckley listened carefully for a while, and then he said, well, Norman, I hope you won't mind if I preserve the Republic while you're working out these grand plans. So we've got law enforcement and the military is a key part right now. We have to respond. And I think we're learning and getting better. I was involved in the prosecution of international drug smuggling for 12 years. It required cooperation, intelligence sharing worldwide, and we got better and better about it. A great deal of time was invested in that. So what I would propose is that we do begin to look at this again, how we can develop a comprehensive approach. We used the phrase like the George Kennan containment strategy that contained the Soviet Union and expansive communism for decades. We should focus on that, not to contain our Muslim allies and friends in the region, but contain violent extremism that threatens the region, Europe, and the United States. Their whole ideology is expansionistic, and we just simply have to confront that and defeat it. I believe we can do a lot better job of working together. I think Congress is ready to do so.
You know, what we're hearing over and over again is how long this is going to take. The political solution could take many, 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 many years, especially when you're talking about countries like Yemen and Libya. Yeah. There has been some success against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. They have lost some real estate. But when you consider the fact that the United States is spending $11 million a day just in Iraq and Syria, it still has thousands of troops in Afghanistan. France has got troops in Africa at home, and is also helping in the fight against ISIS. These growing costs, these billions and billions of dollars. I think the latest estimate for the U.S. spending in Iraq and Syria is $6.5 billion. And ISIS has lost a little real estate. I mean, you can understand why people would be a little skeptical about whether or not this military strategy is working when, in fact, the general said they just move elsewhere. And they move to areas where we're not present, Libya. Exactly. Where we only have a small number of special operations forces on the ground. Yemen. Is this military strategy working?
Good question.
Or is it for domestic consumption only? Is it to appease publics at home that our governments are actually doing something?
Well, what our Democrat and Republican colleagues in the Senate believe is that we've got to be more careful about committing troops in a major way that's so exceedingly expensive and creates complications and risks that we don't need to necessarily do. So when I say we develop a strategy, it doesn't mean to invade large numbers of troops. Use first all the soft power, use sanctions, use diplomatic powers, and then we decide we need to step up with military, maybe using allies who are committed and threatened more directly, and support them in their efforts, identify threats that really are serious, threats that may not be, that we can let burn themselves out without threat to the region. All of those kind of things. We need the best minds. I'm not there. And we need the best people with the best intelligence. We have to share that intelligence. And if we can reach that level of unity, I think we might surprise ourselves how effective we could be. Because this is an irrational, radical agenda that it can't be sustained for too long. Although the expert witnesses, Heritage Foundation, Brookings Foundation, Defense Department officials say we're likely to see violence and threats of violence out of the region for several decades.
And General, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, you know, we are in a world today where everyone expects immediate result. If we look back in history, we have so many examples of such a situation that took years, decades, even sometimes centuries to be solved. I mean, I learned when I was at school, the 100 years between France and UK. 100 years. 100 years. We are facing today a challenge, and we know that it will be a long-term effort. So the question is, how do we manage this effort? How do we don't create expectation in this world of immediate result? Everyone wants immediate result. Media, political sometimes for some reasons. And we know that it will take long term. So we have to be honest and clear with our population, I think, that it will take time. And it will cost money, for sure. We'll have to support that effort from a military point of view, obviously. And as you mentioned, France is really now, the French forces are really stretched, considering the level of our resources, the level of our manpower to address all the issues we try to address, and including the French territory. But not only from a military point of view, as it has been said, and that's where we need also to invest resources to make sure that on all the different axes that we have mentioned, education in those countries, economic development, humanitarian aid, all those things, I mean, counter-propaganda, needs to be taken as well.
Because
so
in the long
sure,
term, that's cheaper than fighting a war.
I want just to add one word, I think, in the case of Libya, for example. Let me say I completely share the transitions, the peace building will be long, will be complicated, will be difficult. In the case for Libya, for example, we had the last year the talks between all Libyan factions in Morocco with the support of our partners at the UN, at Europe. At the beginning, they could not talk to each other, different factions. How could you, after the success of the military intervention in Libya, how could you build up something coherent, something consistent with two governments, two parliaments, no civil society, no political parties? And we were able, after hours and days and months of negotiation, to compromise on the formation of a government of national unity to move forward. But when we came to implement the decisions, it was another story. Still, because they are different actors, we need to not only to compromise on a political solution, and the respect of, I think, something essential today, and I think Didier would agree with me, the respect of the independence, the national unity of countries, and the political transition and compromise to move towards a political solution. This is the way how we should move, I think, towards this. But this is, I think it will take time. The military is essential. Intelligence is essential. Growth, we need to work together. And they are the two faces of the same coin. They have to go together. The military, the intelligence, security, and the block of political. Two faces of the...
But we need to learn some lessons from the past. We have some success now on the ground with military action, it's true. But just after such a success, we need to organize the reconstruction of the cities and of the countries. We have seen that in Iraq and in Libya in the past. It was maybe a success with some military actions, but without any capacity to rebuild immediately the country and to provide some services to the population. So it's quite important now in Syria and Iraq to start immediately the reconstruction of the cities and the different places, and then to have real political discussions. On the other side, as a diplomat of Minister of Foreign Affairs, I want to say that we need also to try to send sometimes the same message to some partners. I mean, between the US and Europe. It's quite important to try to see what kind of dialogue with Russia. Because we don't have only the situation in Syria. We are facing Ukraine for the moment. And so how it's possible to be firm on some positions with Russia, but to have a sort of dialogue, to be open to try to find a way to have a political solution in Ukraine, in Syria, in other places. And more than that, I said, due to the fact that we have had a success in the nuclear talks with Iran, how it's possible to try to, if I may, put together Saudi Arabia and Iran in different talks, because we are knowing that there is a real fight in the region between some powers. And so I'm sure that in the relation between the US and Europe, it's quite important to find a way to send a common message about those issues, at least, to Russia on one side, but also to the two partners in the region, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Because without talks among those partners, it will be impossible to solve the situation. So we need to have a military action, but we need to try to organize the transition and to learn, I repeat, the lesson from the past. Because, if I may to be short, the military action in Libya was a success. And then, the day after. And now we are knowing that we need to do something the day after. And it's the case for the moment in Syria and Iraq, we try to do the job. We try to come immediately with some capacity to rebuild the cities, to provide services, security, education, all the different services to the population. But after all, we need a political solution, and to have a political solution, we need to send a very clear message to some partners, if I may, Russia, and the two major partners in the region, Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Do you think Russia should be involved in the military coalition against ISIS?
They were.
Should they be working
in practice,
with the coalition?
Because, but I mean, with the airstrikes from Russia, it was impossible to organize other airstrikes from the coalition sometimes. So it was not a real collaboration, but in the practice it was a fact. And I don't know, maybe one day we will have a new resolution from the Security Council to work together against Daesh. But to do that, again, we need to have a political solution. Without a real political agreement about Syria, it will be impossible to have everybody around the table and to work together against Daesh.
It would
General, did you-
seem from common sense that we should be able to reach an accord with Russia, although it's certainly been problematic recently.
And also, Senator, that obviously all of us understand the need to help rebuild these countries that are being ravaged by war, but the U.S., many officials in the U.S. have said repeatedly over the past few years, we're no longer involved in nation building after what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, you know, how much resources and how many people do we now have involved in rebuilding a Syria and Iraq? Are we not back to where we started with more than a dozen years ago in Iraq, trying to rebuild that country and failed, basically?
We've learned a lot. Rebuilding a country once order has been destroyed, even a brutal order, oftentimes is worse than what was before. Syria had a brutal dictator, and we so much wanted to see improvement there. But when you end up with 200,000 perhaps killed, millions refugees, complete disorder and spreading in the region, then we have to be very careful, I think, in the future. The United States is increasing our defense budget. We have $3.4 billion for European reassurance. For several years now, I'm reaching the point that I want Europe to reassure me. I mean, do you care? 75% of NATO is funded by the United States. We've got very large deficits. We have the Pacific region that demands a greater presence by the United States, more naval ships, and we're trying to rebuild our Navy. So we are at a point where I think Europe does need to spend more money on its defense. Gates mentioned that. Secretary Carter has driven that issue. I think our leaders in NATO have pushed that issue, but really things haven't gotten much better.
How do you push additional European countries, and including the Gulf states, as Secretary of State Kerry has said, and Secretary Carter, to get more involved financially and militarily in this effort to fight ISIS and other terrorist groups?
We try to do that, but we are, for the moment, 62 members of the coalition, and we are organizing the presence of a lot of European countries. We try to do the same with the Gulf countries. And of course, about the financial help, you have seen that maybe in London, it was possible to provide $11 billion for the region. 2/3 of such a total amount is coming from Europe, from the European Union and the member states. So we try to put more and more money on the table. It's true that from the European point of view, it's more and more on the humanitarian side. But just to say that, to be sometime a little optimistic, you have had some success in the rebuilding of some states with the Marshall Plan in Europe. It was possible to do that, but with one condition, a political evolution in the region. And the European Union is coming from there. It's coming from the Second World War, and because it was possible to build the European Union and to have a peaceful and democratic process in Europe, it was possible also to rebuild the economy and to have very strong countries now in Europe. So that means that in the region, in Syria and Iraq, without a real political transition, it's impossible to solve the situation, or just with a military action, or just with money on the table. We need to put money on the table, we need to have a military action, but we need first to try to build a political transition. And again, it was a success in Europe after the Second World War to put money on the table and to have a military presence, but due to the fact that it was possible to organize in Europe a real regional integration and a real peaceful process after so many years and sometimes centuries, like you said, of wars. And so in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, and other countries, it's the only one way. without a political solution, right, you will be there during many decades without a real effect on the ground, except some small progresses. So military actions are needed, humanitarian help is needed, but at the end, the only one way is to find the political solution for the different countries.
We're running sort of short on time here, so let's go to questions. There's one right here in the back. And if you would state your name, please, and your
Yes.
affiliation.
Asia bin Salih Alawi, Ambassador at Large of His Majesty the King of Morocco. As we see ISIS losing ground in the Levant, we see it remerge everywhere else, and particularly in Libya, because its central objective, as the General said, is to take roots and have a territory. So my question, having taken note of what you have said about the longer-term approach, about the necessity of learning lessons, about what my compatriot said about the efforts deployed in Morocco for the political solution, what can be done efficiently to prevent ISIS from really taking root there, knowing that it has already assaulted Tunisia and its nation democracy being threatened by the twin threats, as you know, Kasserine, Algerian frontier, and ISIS in the east, and beyond, to take real and stronger links with the local terrorist groups in the Sahel and in Africa, which, of course, are threatening the whole region and destabilizing, potentially, North Africa, which is the last stable place, you know, Morocco and Algeria.
If we could make the answers really brief, please. We've got a lot to get to.
I'm not going to answer because I share
Okay.
completely views. But
You
I
would
would
like
say,
to-
No, just to
I would
say
say
that
we
we-
need to join our efforts to fight terror.
Okay.
But we need to work with the new government in Libya.
Yeah.
This is the only one way. Maybe with a recognition by the United Nations, but also without a real recognition, we need now to work with the new government in Libya, and it's the only one way. If it's possible to work with the new government, we'll start the process to rebuild a real country, and so to try to find on the ground again against the terrorist groups. But the only one way now is to try to work with the new government of Libya. It's the only one way.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Christoph Marschall from Germany. Some of the answers seem to me a little bit too easy, and we are oddly dancing around the real problems. I mean, when I hear we need now to exchange more information about terrorism, I have heard that after 9/11, I have heard that after London, I have heard that after Madrid. Come on, then we should talk why it is not happening if there is still a bigger need. So what are the obstacles? The same if you say, well, rebuilding immediately after, is there really a lack of willingness of the West to provide money, or is it the conditions on the ground? And shouldn't we say the West is not the babysitter who has to bring all the people on the ground together? That's the responsibility of the countries first. And we might give reconstruction money if the conditions on the ground are right. But this blame game, the West or does not provide money or is getting out of a nation building, there's a reason why these decisions have been made.
Can one person take this and make it very brief and right to the point?
I think we should do our own homework at the north and at the south. We have to extend intelligence, and thanks to the cooperation, we have been able to dismantle a lot of cells in Europe thanks to the information gathered and given. Now, if we need to do our homework internally at the level of the Maghreb and so on, we need to have more, as I was saying, more ambitious, new neighborhood policy. You know, we know that we don't have the same political perspectives as the Eastern Partnership to join the European Union. But I think we can have some new instruments and new arrangements to work together.
Okay,
but there is a commitment to work because...
General, did you want to say
Yeah,
something?
just may briefly perhaps give some ways to answer your questions. We're not facing a static threat. The threat is evolving as well. So whatever efforts we try to do, and we do, when you say there is nothing that has been done, or you may think that there are many things that have been done, but in face of us, we have a threat, we have people that always change and adapt and adjust to what we do. So it's always the story. It's always the story of the old story of trying to protect and to attack. So we have to also to understand that in face of us, we have people who are evolving. So we have to permanently adjust and do more That's why when we say we need to do more, we've done a lot. But we need to continue, because in face of us, we have a threat with the evolution.
There's a gentleman right there with the red book, right to your left. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Rajai Barakat, and I would like to ask 3 questions as a Euro-Arab citizen.
Very quickly, please.
Very quickly. First of all, Mr. Minister, you spoke about the ideology of these guys, Salah Abdeslam. As a Euro-Arab citizen, as a culturally Muslim citizen, I try to find to which ideology these guys belong. I find no ideology. And we have to distinguish between these people and the ideology of ISIS. You spoke about Muslim community and its role. Which instruments has the Muslim community here in Belgium or in Europe so as to fight extremism and terrorism? If you have a child, your son is 18 years old, you can't ask him where is he going, what is he doing. If he leaves your house, you can never know where he is living. The system here do not help Muslim communities, and there is no Muslim community. Let's be clear about that. We have no Muslim community. We have Muslims here who are Europeans. And the last question to Honorable Senator. You spoke about cooperation between security services. I can't imagine 2 years ago how it had happened that suddenly, during 1 or 2 weeks, 30,000 ISIS jihadists appears in Iraq, and your secret services and nobody saw them and spoke about this state. There's a lot of things that, as a Euro-Arab citizen, I can't imagine. Who created ISIS? The role of Bremer in the creation of ISIS. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Very briefly, some sentences. First, maybe for the previous question about intelligence, I want just to say that the tradition for the intelligence service is to collect information, not to share. And so we need to change the mentality. And it's in progress, but it's not perfect for the moment. But we need to make some progress on that. The second element, of course, there is an ideology. Ideology of IS, it's very clear. You need to read the different messages from IS about the caliphate, about the way to have a territory, a population, and to impose a specific ideology to this population on such a territory. Of course, it's a fanatism. It's a very small part of maybe the Muslim community, 1 or 2 people in one city is involved in that, but it's a real ideology. And third, of course, I've said communities. We have Muslim communities in, to be frank, in Belgium. If you look to the situation, we have a lot of Muslim people coming from Turkey, from Turkish origin. A lot of. We don't have, maybe 2 or 3, no more, we don't have foreign fighters coming from such a community and going to Iraq and Syria. So there are many differences. So we need to work with the Muslims, but also with the Muslim communities to fight against those fanatics. And without that, it will be a failure. It's impossible to work against such a lot of guys without a real participation of the different Muslim communities in Europe, but also with some partners like Morocco and others.
Okay, we have a question right over here. We also had a question that came in online for you, Minister. Have Belgian intelligence services failed to integrate or to get into the Muslim communities here in the case of this recent arrest?
We need to do more. We are knowing that, but it's true in different cities in Europe. If you look to the suburbs of Paris, we have quite the same situation that in some part of the city in Brussels. We don't manage the presence of the communities in the same way. In Paris, it's more in the different suburbs. In Brussels, it's in the city, in some part of the city. But of course, it's quite difficult to enter in those communities. And again, this was my answer. We need to work with the Muslim people in Belgium, like in other countries, to be sure that it's possible to have correct information and to fight together against fanatism. That's the real issue. And it's not easy, it's true, but it's not easy in many other countries in the world. I've seen terrorist attacks in the US, terrorist attack in Turkey in the last days, and again in Egypt yesterday. So, of course, we need to try to be more informed about the situation inside different communities.
Okay.
Thank you. Kerstin Born from SEPS. Let me play devil's advocate here and look again at the root causes of terrorism. From what I know, and read, Al-Qaeda has come out of Iraq. ISIS has someone overtaken Al-Qaeda. Has been founded by former army employees of Hussein. After he had been taken down. So I listened to you, Senator, when you say, okay, we've learned, so we know what to do before we attack a state. But of course, looking at what now comes over to Europe, my question to perhaps you and Minister Reynders would be, how do we justify that we cooperate with states like Saudi Arabia, who not officially, but through private foundations, fund ISIS? How do we justify cooperating with Turkey, who also support ISIS because they are combating the Kurds? So what is the strategy behind bombing states like Syria, for example, where conveniently we have found a passport next to the attacks in Paris, and that was at least what has brought to us through the media the reason to combating Syria. But again, my last point, and then I stop, is linking up to what the former speaker has said. What role does American intelligence have? Why do we not know of these beforehand?
Well, it's hard to know. The enemy does not want you to know. They're in remote areas. They're using great skill and effort to avoid the kind of, as soon as the things that have been working, they continually change their tactics. They do not desire to have a bomb land on them. So it's life and death to them. So they get better and better at their efforts. This expansionist ideology is still in existence, however. And the intelligence is key. We've made some mistakes. After bitter, costly effort in Iraq, we created a government, a parliament, elections. It was shaky, but it was there. I made the statement to British parliamentarians that perhaps the greatest mistake of the 20th century was the complete withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq, and the British said, well, perhaps it was Bremer's disbanding of the Iraqi army. So we've made a number of mistakes, I would admit. And I hope that we can learn from that. A small number of troops in Iraq U.S. NATO troops, I am absolutely convinced, would have stopped the takeover of large portions of Iraq. So I hope that we can strike the right balance. In Pacific, Japan and Korea were successful rebuilding their societies after a war. But it does appear that in the Middle East we have a complicating factor, and that is it does appear that in short order American troops, NATO troops sent there to make peace become targets and become targets themselves. So it's a more complicated thing than just a Marshall Plan or what happened in Japan.
And we just had a second American killed in Iraq yesterday. And her question about Saudi Arabia and Turkey.
Well, we have to deal with the world as we find it. If you go, I went into Libya not long after this collapse of Gaddafi's government with Senator McCain and Graham and others. And there were huge apartment buildings being built. Chinese got the contract. Some of the U.S. people wanted the contract. They were building, building, building. Most of them not complete yet. Gaddafi had done better. He was investing billions of dollars in improving his country. And now what do we have? Total chaos. 1 million people perhaps in North Africa seeking to come to Europe. And all of these things have happened. So sometimes an imperfect order is better than chaos.
We have a question right here.
Thank you very much. Carrie Buck, Canada's ambassador to NATO. At NATO, we're grappling with modern deterrence, how to define it. So the question is, how do you deter terrorism? Do we have the right balance between military assets, police and intelligence, or community approaches? Or are the words deterrence and containment even the right words for a phenomenon like this, given that most of the recent attacks in Europe and Canada have come from our own citizens, cells operating on our own territories? So do we have the right balance between focus outside and focus inside?
Who would like to take that?
No, of course we need to do both, but first of all, there are also some action of very short term. Now we need to dismantle a lot of cells, a lot of groups of terrorists, a lot of networks, because they are there, but we need also to prevent new evolutions to new terrorist people in the future, and to do that outside, to build new societies with a political transition. I don't want to repeat what I've said about Syria, Iraq, but inside, it's a problem of education and a problem of integration. Is it possible to have a real success about the integration of many populations coming from abroad? And to do that, education, jobs, and then the capacity to take part in the development of the society. But it's a long process, and it's the reason why I've said that we need to do that in a good collaboration with the Muslims, or the different Muslim communities in Europe and in the different member states, like in Belgium. But of course, it's a long process.
Yeah. I had the opportunity to exchange with the ambassador of NATO a few months ago, with the NATO ambassadors. I think you give me an opportunity to request you that NATO should look more south. And now we have this Med dialogue, it's only 1 year meeting. We need, I think, from Moroccan perspective, more interoperability, more political dialogue, and I hope that we know you're working on this new strategic dialogue. We need you to see the Mediterranean and beyond South Sahel and Atlantic coast of Africa, where today 30% of the cocaine and traffic is coming to give it a priority. As a NATO ambassador, I think this is something you should look at it. You know, I know it's difficult and there's some resistance, but this is the request of your Mediterranean partners.
Just, if I may, just one short word. Rather than deter, I would prefer prevent.
We have a question right here.
My name is Simon Fraser. I'm a former British diplomat. I have a question for the General, if I may. As a military leader, how do you evaluate the relative priority of terrorism as a threat, as a security threat, as compared with some of the more conventional threats we face or may face, whether it is Russia or even actually for the Senator potentially China at some point, and the other threats such as cyber security, which are growing dangers to us? I mean, where in the hierarchy of threat does terrorism really sit?
Well, I would say that it's not addressing the same. It's very difficult to compare. For a conventional threat, we have in a conventional world, and there are rules, if I may say so, that we understand. With the terrorist threat, we are totally different environment. No more rules. I mean, violence is being used, ideology, much more than the conventional Westphalian type of conflict. So it's totally different, first. Second, I think it's a much more important threat to our own societies collectively. It's really the heart of our values that are threatened. And that's why I would put this on the far top of the thing that we have to address. Because this is our own values which are really threatened by this ideology. And again, we're discussing about how to deal with this. It's very complicated. I would argue that the situation today in Syria and Iraq, tomorrow perhaps in Libya, is a very, very complex one. We all know that. It's very difficult to know where to adjust and to push, and which button to push, trying to solve the issue. But really, the terrorism is the one who is really threatening our societies, our values. So we have really to address this one on the far front of our preoccupation.
I could not have asked for a better segue. We've got a forum. We're going to continue the security talk in a little bit, and the topic is security or values. But there's something coming up next, so we want you all to stay around for that. Derek?
Well, thank you for a terrific opening discussion. What we heard, it was that to take on the fight against terrorism, It's going to need to be multifaceted. It's not just military force. We need a comprehensive approach, and it's going to take time. But what we've discussed so far is from the outside looking in. And of course, it is always important for us to keep in mind what is going on the ground. And a key part of the West strategy in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere is to build partner capacity, to work with those in the country so they could provide for their own security and deal with the tremendous challenges that they're facing in their country. So our next conversation, the second part of this opening section, will provide us a perspective from on the ground. And with that, I will turn it over to Kim Dozier of the Daily Beast and CNN.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Derek. And what we're going to do right now is just inject a little bit of on-the-ground reality into the discussion, because we've been hearing a lot about policy, prescriptions from people who live far away, haven't spent as much time as these two women have in the region. Let's see, I'm trying not to do the deep breathing thing on the microphone to you all. So I want to introduce Dr. Nada Mohammed Ibrahim Al-Jabouri. She is a former member of the Iraqi Council of Representatives and the head of Iraqi Women and Future organization. She's also a member of the Reconciliation Committee in Baghdad. And also, you have seen her before on the stage, Nancy Lindbergh, the president of the United States Institute of Peace. So let's start with that first question. Give us a snapshot. Nada, what is it like on the streets of Baghdad today?
Thank you. Actually, now I think most of you, they know there is a lot of chaos in Baghdad, and there is a lot of demonstration in the streets everywhere around the Green Zone, which is the residential place for the Iraqi government and the parliament. And those demonstrations have been run by al-Sadrists, asking for real reconciliation. But this is, you can see on TV, and if you go to Baghdad, maybe you cannot walk from one area to one area. And every now and then there is maybe one explosion. And also there is kidnapping and disappearing of some of the figures, of the social figures. So more or less it is unstable and fragile political process as a whole.
So when you leave your house, do you have a bodyguard? Do you think about your security? Do you look to the end of the block to see if you see someone suspicious? How do you travel around?
No, for me, I travel around with one body only. Since the beginning in my work as a politician, I used to be like this because I cannot think about it actually. When I think about it, that means I'm not going to leave my house in the morning, so I never think about it. Maybe sometimes I pray and leave the house because it's very difficult to think about it. That means you are not going to do anything. So it's better not to think because you don't know who is the enemy and you don't know who is the friend.
So
this is the problem.
Rather than let fear freeze you in place, you just know the dangers out there and do it anyway.
Yes, you know, but there was sometimes we had some stability for a while in Baghdad. But it doesn't mean stability in Baghdad that I'm going to stop thinking about Anbar and Salahuddin and Mosul, who I'm receiving a lot of calls and requests, and I meet the displaced people maybe every other day, everywhere. So it doesn't mean you will feel, even if some sort of stability by the army, but that doesn't